Most people try to manifest without ever learning the foundation behind it, and that's why their results are inconsistent. What we're about to cover is the part almost everyone skips. Once you understand this, manifestation gets a lot easier with consistent results. Welcome to the Conscious Creator. This is where we explore the ideas that help you understand your inner world and how it shapes the life unfolding around you. The first time I ever realized there was more to life than what we were taught was because of a book that found me at a time I wasn't looking for anything. I was in college, overwhelmed, busy, and not remotely interested in recreational reading. But this book kept showing up in my awareness. It sat on a dresser in my family's house like it had a job to do. I ignored it for weeks, but something about it kept pulling at me. Eventually I picked it up, and that moment changed the direction of my life. It was the first time I understood how synchronicity works. The right ideas always seem to find us when we're ready for them, even if we don't know we're ready. The book was The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, and it opened a door I didn't even know existed. I realized there were patterns happening beneath ordinary life, and if we learned how to read them, our entire experience could change. We're not going through the story of the book here. That's something best experienced for yourself. What we are going to explore are the insights beneath it, because those insights form the foundation of conscious creation. They explain why intuition shows up the way it does, why synchronicity accelerates, why our energy matters, and why manifestation becomes easier when we understand the mechanics behind our inner world. These insights are simple, powerful, and incredibly practical. And once you start applying them, manifestation stops feeling random. It becomes consistent, natural, and aligned. Let's begin with the first insight and see how this journey really starts. The first insight is that humanity is waking up. It shows us that something big is happening across the world, even if it doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. It says that people everywhere are beginning to sense life in a new way. We're becoming more aware, more curious, and more open to the idea that life might be connected on a deeper level than we were taught to believe. This insight feels exciting because it explains something many of us have already noticed in our own lives. There comes a point when we start looking at ordinary moments with fresh eyes. We catch ourselves wondering why certain events feel meaningful. We sense a little spark of curiosity where we used to feel routine. We start paying attention to things that never mattered to us before. It's like something inside us is stretching, trying to take in more of the world at once. The first insight says, this isn't random. We're part of a larger shift that's been building for a long time. As a society, we're starting to care more about purpose. We want our lives to feel connected. We want our days to mean something. We want to understand ourselves, not just get through the week. And even when we can't describe it yet, we can feel that something is changing. One of the easiest ways to recognize this shift is through the moments that catch our attention. Maybe we overhear something that feels oddly timely. Maybe we walk away from a simple interaction with a sense that it mattered more than we thought. Maybe we realize we're noticing patterns we would have ignored in the past. These moments make us pause. They make us wonder. And once we've noticed them, it becomes hard to go back to sleepwalk mode. This insight also explains why so many of us feel drawn to explore ideas about energy, intuition, synchronicity, and consciousness. Even people who never considered themselves spiritual or reflective are finding themselves curious about the way their inner world affects their lives. We start paying attention to the subtle things, the tone of a conversation, the feeling in a room, the timing of an event, the quiet sense that something is guiding us forward. Awakening doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives through a series of small realizations that make us question the way we've been moving through life. We begin noticing how our thoughts influence our mood, how our mood influences our behavior, and how our behavior shapes the opportunities that show up. Everything starts feeling connected in a way that feels natural, not forced. What makes this insight so empowering is how personal it is. We don't have to believe anything new or adopt a specific philosophy. We just start noticing life in a way that feels richer and more alive. We feel more aware of our choices, more connected to the people around us, more interested in what's happening beneath the surface. It doesn't turn us into someone different. It helps us become more of who we already are. And once this awareness opens up, the rest of the insights start to make sense. We realize that life has been trying to get our attention for a long time. We just weren't tuned in to notice it. The second insight is that synchronicity is real. It shows us that the meaningful coincidences in our lives are not accidental. They're part of a larger pattern that becomes visible once we start paying attention. When events line up in a way that feels too perfect to ignore, the insight encourages us to treat those moments as guidance instead of chance. It suggests that life is always communicating with us through timing, connection, and opportunity. Most of us have experienced moments like this long before we ever heard the word synchronicity. We think of someone we haven't talked to in years, and they reach out that same afternoon. We come across a book at the exact time we're ready for it. We overhear a conversation that answers a question we've been wrestling with internally. These moments feel personal, almost like life is nudging us in a direction we wouldn't have found on our own. The Celestine Prophecy explains these experiences as part of an unfolding process. Once we recognize that awakening is happening, the next step is noticing how life starts responding to our awareness. When we're open, we begin to pick up on signals that were always there but hidden beneath the noise of daily life. The more present we become, the more these moments stand out. They connect us to a flow that feels intelligent and surprisingly precise. What makes this insight so empowering is the idea that synchronicity becomes more common once we learn to trust it. When we follow these little clues, we often discover that they lead us to new opportunities, important conversations, and insights we didn't know we needed. It feels like being guided from one step to the next, with each moment arriving right on cue. This doesn't mean everything in our life suddenly turns magical. It means we start noticing the moments that were meaningful all along. We stop brushing off coincidences as random. We take them seriously enough to explore where they lead. When something catches our attention twice, we pause. When a theme keeps showing up in conversations, we look closer. When we feel pulled towards something for no clear reason, we give ourselves permission to follow it. The second insight also helps us understand why awakening feels so different from the routine way we used to move through life. Instead of seeing events as disconnected, we start to sense an invisible thread connecting them. A conversation leads to an idea leads to an opportunity leads to a relationship or a change we didn't expect. Looking back, it all makes sense, even if we couldn't see the whole path when we took the first step. This insight encourages us to trust the moments that feel aligned, not blindly, but with curiosity. We're invited to treat life as a partner in the unfolding of our journey. Instead of forcing outcomes, we tune into the rhythm of things. We let timing guide us. We follow what feels right. We stay open to the possibility that life is more interactive than we once believed. The more we work with synchronicity, the more natural it becomes. We begin noticing patterns that help us make decisions with more confidence. We learn to recognize when something feels guided and when something feels forced. We become better at following the signals that move our life forward in meaningful ways. This insight shifts the way we understand our experiences. Instead of assuming we're alone in our decisions, we start to feel supported by something larger. Once this idea becomes real to us, it changes the way we move through the world. It invites us to listen more deeply, trust more fully, and stay open to the moments that arrive with perfect timing. And once we understand that synchronicity isn't accidental, the next insight begins to take shape. We start asking questions about what exactly we're interacting with and how our awareness plays a role in shaping these moments. The third insight is that everything is energy. It gives us a completely different way to understand the world around us. It says that everything we see, everything we feel, and everything we interact with is made of energy. Not in a complicated scientific way, but in a very practical, everyday sense. Our thoughts carry energy. Our emotions carry energy. Our attention carries energy. And this energy affects the way we experience our lives. Once we hear this, it explains things we've sensed for years. We've all walked into a room and felt the atmosphere right away. We've been around people whose presence lifts us or drains us without a single word being spoken. We've noticed how certain places make us feel calm, while others make us feel tense. These aren't random reactions. They're responses to the energy being exchanged in those moments. The Celestine Prophecy uses this insight to show us that we're part of a larger field of interaction. We're not separate from our environment. We're constantly giving and receiving energy, even when we don't realize it. This isn't meant to sound mysterious. It's meant to validate the experiences we already understand instinctively. When our energy is steady, our day flows more easily. When we're stressed, everything feels heavier. When we feel inspired, life seems to open doors without effort. This insight invites us to pay attention to the way our inner state shapes our outer experience. When we feel centered, our conversations go differently. When we're hopeful, we notice possibilities that were invisible before. When we're closed off, the world seems to shrink. This is the impact of our energy. It influences how we interpret situations and how people respond to us. The more aware we become, the more we see these patterns playing out in real time. Another important part of this insight is the idea that attention itself is a form of energy. Wherever we place our focus, we create movement. If we dwell on fear, anxiety grows. If we tune into gratitude, our mood shifts. If we concentrate on a goal, opportunities begin to stand out. This doesn't mean we're controlling everything. It means we're participating in the flow of life in a way that's more active than we once believed. What makes this insight so exciting is how empowering it feels. We realize that we're not just reacting to life, we're shaping it. When we understand our energy, we become more intentional about how we show up. We choose conversations more carefully. We protect our peace. We recognize when we're giving too much of ourselves and when we're holding back out of habit. We start adjusting our inner world with the same care we give to our outer responsibilities. This awareness also helps us understand the interactions we have with others. When someone snaps at us and we instantly feel drained, we see the energy exchange instead of taking it personally. When someone lights up a room, we understand why we feel uplifted. We begin to sense when someone is overwhelmed, even if they try to hide it. This doesn't make us psychic. It makes us human and attentive. The third insight encourages us to take ownership of our own energy. It reminds us that the more connected we feel within ourselves, the more connected we feel to life. We're not trying to maintain perfect emotions. We're learning how to navigate our inner world with awareness and compassion. As we do, we begin to see the ripple effect of every shift we make. When we understand that everything is energy, the world stops feeling random. It becomes responsive. We begin to feel the link between our inner state and the synchronicities that show up. We understand why the right ideas arrive when we're calm and open. We feel the difference between forcing something and allowing it to unfold. This insight strengthens our trust in the relationship between consciousness and experience. And with this foundation in place, the next insight becomes even clearer. Once we understand how energy moves between us and the world, we can start exploring how it moves between us and other people. Insight 4 is about control dramas, the unconscious roles we learned in childhood to stay emotionally safe long before we understood anything about energy or behavior. These patterns weren't chosen on purpose. They developed naturally in the environments we grew up in, and for a long time, we didn't even realize we were using them. Once we see these roles clearly, so many of our interactions start to make sense. First, there's the intimidator. This pattern uses strong emotion, pressure, or intensity to take control of the moment. It doesn't have to be loud. Even a sharp shift in tone can make others shrink back, and that reaction becomes the source of energy. People who learned this role weren't trying to dominate anyone. They grew up in environments where being forceful was the only way to be heard or acknowledged. Next, we have the interrogator. This role takes control by questioning, analyzing, or pointing out what's wrong. The attention gets directed toward flaws or inconsistencies, and the other person ends up on the defensive. This pattern often forms in childhood environments where staying alert and one step ahead felt necessary for emotional safety. Then there's the aloof. This pattern creates distance, not coldness, just a subtle withdrawal. The person becomes harder to read, gives short answers, or stays slightly outside the emotional center of the interaction. That distance naturally pulls people in because they want to understand what's happening. The attention that flows toward them becomes the energy source. This usually forms when open expression didn't feel welcome or safe in childhood. And finally, there's the poor me. This pattern uses struggle or sadness to draw connection, comfort, or support. It's not manipulation. It's a learned way of getting emotional reassurance when other pathways weren't available. The energy comes from the concern offered by the people around them. These 4 patterns are not flaws. They're not fixed traits. They're simply survival strategies we developed before we had the awareness we have now. And the moment we recognize them, the grip they have on us begins to soften. Awareness gives us room to choose a different response. It quiets the emotional charge in conversations. It helps us understand others instead of taking everything personally. And most importantly, once we stop pulling energy from each other, we're finally ready for the next insight, the one that shows us how to reconnect with a deeper source of energy that doesn't rely on anyone else. The 5th insight is about understanding where our patterns begin. James Redfield uses it to help us see why those control dramas from the previous insight develop in the first place. It takes us back to childhood and shows us that every pattern we have today began as a response to the environment we grew up in. We weren't born with these roles. We shaped them around whatever dynamics existed in our family, because children naturally adapt to get emotional safety, attention, or stability. This insight isn't about blame. Redfield makes it very clear that our parents were operating from their own patterns too. They weren't trying to limit us. They were simply acting from the same unconscious habits they learned in their own childhoods. When we look at it this way, everything starts to feel less personal and more understandable. The heart of this insight is realization. When we understand the environment we grew up in, we begin to see why we chose a certain role. The intimidator learned to raise their energy because that was the only way to be heard. The interrogator learned to observe everything because it felt safer to stay in control. The aloof learned distance because self-expression didn't feel welcome. The poor me learned vulnerability because it brought comfort or softness from the people around them. The moment we understand where our own behavior came from, something shifts. We stop seeing our patterns as personality traits. We begin to see them as old strategies that were useful at one time but no longer serve us. That understanding opens the door to change. Because once we recognize the pattern, we're no longer acting from instinct. We're acting from awareness. James Redfield also explains that each family environment has its own energy story. Some homes were loud and chaotic, others were quiet and emotionally distant. Some were warm but inconsistent. These atmospheres taught us how to survive emotionally, not because anyone set out to teach us, but because children absorbed the emotional tone they grow up in. We shaped ourselves in response to whatever was happening around us. The powerful part of this insight is that it helps us break cycles. When we understand the emotional atmosphere we came from, we gain the ability to create something different in our adult lives. We stop repeating the same reactions without knowing why. We stop projecting our old fears onto current situations. We stop assuming the past is the template for every relationship we'll ever have. This insight isn't meant to make us dwell on childhood. It's meant to free us from it. Redfield highlights that once we understand the origins of our behavior, we can soften the grip those early experiences have on us. We begin responding from who we are now, not from the child we used to be. It also deepens our compassion for others. When we recognize that everyone around us learned their patterns the same way we did, it becomes easier to understand why people act the way they do. We stop taking their reactions as a personal attack. We start seeing the unspoken history behind their behavior. That understanding changes the emotional tone of our interactions. The 5th insight prepares us for an important shift. Once we know where our old habits came from, we're ready to step into a new way of relating to ourselves and the world. We become aware that our energy doesn't have to come from others or from old strategies. There's a deeper source available to us, and the next insight reveals exactly what that is. The 6th insight is about tuning back into our real source of energy. James Redfield describes it as one of the most freeing ideas in the entire Celestine journey. After we understand how we've been pulling energy from each other, this insight shows us that we don't actually need to do that at all. There's a deeper source of energy available to us, and it's something we can connect with directly. Redfield explains that when we feel centered, calm, inspired, or grounded, we're not getting that feeling from other people. We're tapping into a natural flow that's already available to all of us. It comes from the world around us, from quiet moments of reflection, from nature, and from the deeper part of ourselves that doesn't rely on approval or attention. The moment we experience this for the first time, It's a revelation. We realize we don't need to push, impress, withdraw, or perform to feel steady inside. Those patterns were only there because we didn't know how to access this deeper connection. This insight teaches us what that connection actually feels like. It's the sensation we get when we're standing somewhere beautiful and everything in us softens. It's that quiet lift we feel when we take a breath and become present. It's the clarity that shows up when we stop forcing things and let our mind settle. Redfield points out that these moments aren't random. They're glimpses of what life feels like when we're plugged into our true source of energy. Once we learn to recognize this feeling, we can return to it more often. Not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually. We start noticing when we've disconnected from ourselves. We notice when we're trying too hard or putting pressure on someone else. We notice when conversations shift tone because we're suddenly seeking something. That awareness lets us pause and reconnect. Redfield also explains that when we're tuned into this deeper source, the way we interact with people changes. We don't pull from them. We don't shrink around them. We don't try to fill the silence with control. We show up more authentically because we're no longer trying to manage the energy in the room. We're already full. Something else happens too. Intuition becomes clearer. When we're grounded, we notice ideas that feel right for us. We sense when something is off without needing proof. We follow impulses that lead us to the right people or the right opportunities. This isn't magical thinking. It's what happens when we're not tangled up in old habits. Our natural clarity finally has space to come through. Redfield emphasizes that this connection isn't reserved for special moments. We don't have to wait for a quiet walk or a beautiful view. We can tune into it in the middle of a busy day, during a conversation, or in the moments when life feels overwhelming. It's simply a matter of coming back to ourselves, taking a breath, becoming present, feeling the difference between tension and openness. What makes this insight so powerful is how it changes the way we move through daily life. We stop chasing validation. We stop relying on other people's reactions to tell us who we are. We begin trusting our own guidance. And because we're not draining or being drained, our relationships become more balanced and more meaningful. This insight is the turning point in Redfield's work. Once we understand that our energy comes from a deeper place, we're no longer living from survival patterns. We're living from connection. And when we live from that place, we start to notice something else. Life begins responding to us in a way that feels coordinated and intelligent. That realization leads directly into the next insight, where intuition becomes a central part of how we navigate our path. The seventh insight is about seeing intuition for what it really is. When James Redfield talks about intuition in this insight, it isn't presented as something new that we suddenly develop once we become more aware. What he's really doing is giving us a name for something many of us have been experiencing our entire lives. Intuition has always been there. We just didn't recognize how it worked or trust it fully. For me, intuition wasn't a discovery. I grew up with it woven into my everyday life. My mom used to tell me, always trust your first instinct. She'd explain that the very first thought or feeling we have the moment something is presented to us is the honest one. It arrives before we overthink, before fear or logic steps in, and before we talk ourselves out of what we already knew. That idea stayed with me. And when I look back, I can see how often that first instinct turned out to be right. There's a kind of purity to that first impression. It doesn't push or demand. It's just there, immediate and clear. And when we trust it, it strengthens. It becomes easier to hear. It shows up more often because we're no longer ignoring it. Redfield's insight helped me understand another way intuition speaks. And this one surprised me because it didn't come through a feeling. It came through the absence of a feeling I normally had. As a kid, whenever I had homework, I couldn't relax until it was done. That sense of urgency sat in my stomach like a quiet knot, reminding me there was still something I needed to take care of. It didn't matter if the work was easy or difficult. If it was due the next day, I felt it. That's just how I was wired. But every now and then, the feeling would vanish. I'd have homework, and yet that familiar pressure wasn't there. I'd notice it immediately because it was so unusual for me. And every time this happened, without fail, school would be canceled the next day. A snowstorm would roll in. Buses wouldn't run. Classes would be called off. There was no reason to finish anything, because the day it was due simply didn't exist anymore. At the time, I didn't understand what that meant. I just found it interesting. But looking back after reading Redfield's insight, it finally made sense. Intuition isn't always a signal that tells us to act. Sometimes it tells us we don't need to. The absence of urgency was guidance, just as real as any nudge or knowing. This is what makes the seventh insight so exciting. Intuition isn't mysterious, it's practical. It shows up in ways that fit who we are. For some of us, intuition lands as a sudden idea that feels right. For others, it arrives as a quiet discomfort when something is off, and sometimes it hides in plain sight as a missing feeling we usually depend on. Once we stop pulling energy from other people and connect with ourselves, intuition becomes clearer. We can actually feel our internal yes and our internal no. We notice which direction has life in it and which one feels heavy. We sense when something is aligned, even if we can't explain why. And we begin realizing that intuition doesn't give us the whole picture. It gives us the next step. When we take that step, the next one appears. This is how life guides us, moment by moment. What Redfield shows us is that intuition works best when we trust it, not blindly, but with openness. If something lights up, we lean toward it. If something feels flat or pressured, we pause. And when synchronicities start lining up, they usually confirm the direction intuition already pointed to. This insight changes everything, because it shifts us from forcing outcomes to following the natural rhythm of our own awareness. It makes decision-making easier. It makes daily life smoother. And it gives us confidence that we're not navigating the world alone. Something inside us is already tuned to the path ahead. And once we understand how intuition moves within us, we're ready for the eighth insight, where Redfield shows how our relationships transform when both people begin connecting from this deeper, more conscious place. The eighth insight is about growing into more conscious relationships. By the time James Redfield reaches this insight, something interesting happens. We've spent so much time understanding our own energy, our own patterns, and our own intuition that suddenly we're ready to look at the people in our lives with completely different eyes. This insight is all about relationships, but not in the usual sense. It's about what happens when two people show up without pulling energy from each other and without acting out their old roles. Redfield explains that when we stop relying on those control dramas from earlier insights, our relationships naturally shift. Conversations feel lighter. Interactions feel more real. We're no longer walking into a room trying to protect ourselves or manage the energy around us. We're not trying to win, prove anything, or hide. We're just present. And that changes everything. This insight is exciting because it reminds us that relationships aren't meant to be battles or power struggles. They're opportunities for growth. When we're steady inside, we don't feel threatened by other people's emotions or opinions. We don't shrink when someone is strong. We don't puff up when someone is soft. We stay ourselves, and that steadiness creates room for genuine connection. Redfield also talks about something that feels incredibly true once you hear it. When two people are connected to their own source of energy, they naturally lift each other. They notice opportunities together. They sense ideas together, and they inspire each other without trying. The interaction becomes something larger than either person individually. It has momentum and clarity. It becomes a shared field of awareness. This doesn't mean relationships suddenly become perfect. It means they become conscious. We start paying attention to the emotional tone we bring into the room. We notice when our old patterns want to slip back in. We catch the moment we start defending ourselves or shutting down, and instead of reacting automatically, we take a breath and reconnect. That tiny pause can shift the entire direction of the conversation. One of the most powerful parts of this insight is how clearly it reveals the difference between fear-based connection and conscious connection. Fear-based connection happens when we're trying to get something from the other person: approval, security, validation, attention. Conscious connection happens when both people are connected to themselves first. The relationship becomes something that adds to us, not something we lean on to fill a gap. Redfield also explains that when we're both intuitive and aware, our relationships become incredibly synchronistic. We meet people at the perfect time, We have conversations that change our direction in ways we didn't expect. We sense when someone is meant to be part of our journey for a moment, and we sense when it's time to move in a different direction. There's a natural flow to it, and we stop forcing things that aren't right for us. The eighth insight isn't about finding a perfect partner or surrounding ourselves with flawless relationships. It's about learning to show up as our real selves and letting others do the same. When we do that, even challenging interactions become easier to navigate. We understand the emotional history behind someone's behavior. We see where their patterns came from, and instead of reacting, we respond with clarity. This insight also prepares us for something deeper. When we start relating to people consciously, we begin to understand our place in a larger story. Our relationships become part of how life guides us, not obstacles we have to figure out. We learn from each other and grow together. We move forward with more awareness because every interaction reveals something important. Redfield uses this insight to remind us that conscious relationships aren't built on control or fear. They're built on presence. When we show up fully, with our energy balanced and our intuition awake, our relationships become doors to the next stage of our evolution. And that realization sets the stage for the ninth insight, where Redfield expands this idea beyond individual relationships and shows how all of this fits into the future of humanity itself. The ninth insight is about understanding our place in a larger story. By the time James Redfield reaches this insight, everything we've explored so far suddenly opens into a bigger picture. The earlier insights help us understand our energy, our intuition, and our relationships. But this one asks us to look at all of those pieces as part of something much larger. Redfield suggests that humanity is moving toward a higher level of awareness, and when we understand our own growth, we begin to understand the role we play in that collective shift. This insight feels exciting because it doesn't claim we're meant to do something extraordinary or dramatic. Instead, it reminds us that the way we live, the choices we make, and the state of consciousness we bring into the world all contribute to the direction humanity is moving in. The small things matter. The way we communicate matters. The way we treat each other matters. Every moment we choose awareness over old habits becomes part of something bigger than our individual lives. Redfield talks about a future where people live with much more clarity, where intuition is trusted, where synchronicities guide us naturally, and where relationships help us grow instead of hold us back. According to him, this isn't wishful thinking. It's the natural evolution that begins once we stop living from fear and start living from connection. When enough of us begin doing that, the world around us shifts. The ninth insight also helps us understand that our personal growth isn't separate from the world's growth. They're connected. When we understand our own patterns, the collective becomes clearer. When we learn to stop pulling energy from others, we reduce conflict in a very real way. When our intuition becomes sharper, we're guided into situations that help us contribute in ways we may not have expected. None of this feels forced. It unfolds naturally once we're aware of how interconnected everything truly is. Another important part of this insight is the idea that we're meant to share what we learn, not by preaching, not by convincing, but simply by living in a more conscious way. When we're steady inside, people feel it. When we follow our intuition, we inspire others to trust their own. When we allow synchronicities to guide us, we become examples of what a connected life looks like. Redfield makes it clear that our presence is part of our purpose. This insight also touches on the idea of alignment. When we're connected to our energy and listening to our intuition, opportunities appear that match who we're becoming. We meet people who help us grow. We find ourselves drawn to situations that expand our understanding. It's as if the world is participating in our development. Redfield suggests that these moments aren't random. They're signs that we're aligned with something larger than ourselves. The ninth insight isn't saying we're heading toward a perfect world. It's saying we're evolving. We're learning to see beyond old patterns. We're learning to trust our inner guidance. We're learning to create relationships that lift us. And as more of us step into that way of living, the overall direction of humanity becomes clearer and more intentional. It's quiet progress, but it's powerful. What makes this insight so meaningful is that it reminds us we're part of a movement that's already happening. We don't have to create it. We're contributing to it simply by becoming more aware. each insight builds toward this realization. Our personal awakening isn't separate from the world's awakening. It fits directly into it. Redfield leaves us with a sense that our lives have a deeper purpose than we may have realized. Not a pressured purpose, but a natural one. When we live with awareness, intuition, connection, and trust, we help shape a future that reflects those same qualities. We're not just living our lives, we're influencing the evolution of consciousness itself. And with this final insight, the journey through the Celestine Prophecy comes full circle. We understand ourselves, we understand others, and we understand the larger story we're part of. Now that we've walked through all 9 insights James Redfield introduces, something becomes much clearer. Each insight on its own is interesting, but when we see how they fit together, we realize Redfield isn't just describing ideas, he's describing a progression. It's a shift in how we experience ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. The journey begins with awareness, not the dramatic kind, but the simple moment when we notice that life feels more connected than we once believed. That growing awareness changes the way we interpret events. It makes us pay attention to timing and to the small coincidences that seem almost too precise. Once we let ourselves notice them, patterns start to emerge. From there, the ideas expand into energy and the emotional habits we've carried for years. When we look back on our childhood and the environments we grew up in, we can see how we developed certain ways of protecting ourselves. Those old strategies shaped many of our interactions without us realizing it. Seeing those patterns clearly is often the turning point, because once we understand why we act a certain way, we're not bound to it anymore. Redfield's journey then shifts from understanding the past to tuning into the present. We begin connecting with a deeper source of energy that isn't dependent on anyone else's reaction. When we feel grounded within ourselves, intuition becomes much easier to recognize. Instead of wondering what to do next, we notice that our inner guidance has already started showing us, often quietly, often in subtle ways. But once we understand how it speaks to us, life feels less confusing. The later insights show us how all of this changes the way we relate to others. When we're not acting from old habits, our relationships naturally become more open. Conversations soften. We listen differently. We understand each other more easily. Even challenging moments feel less heavy because we're responding from awareness rather than instinct. This shift in the way we communicate becomes one of the clearest signs that we're living from a new level of consciousness. And finally, the 9th insight widens the lens. It reminds us that our personal growth isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a larger change that's unfolding around the world. As more of us learn to trust our intuition, connect with ourselves, and build conscious relationships, the atmosphere of humanity changes. Not dramatically at first, but steadily, quietly, through the way we show up in everyday life. When we look at the 9 insights as a complete journey, we see a simple pattern. We wake up, we understand ourselves, we heal our old habits, we learn to trust our inner guidance, and we begin relating to the world from a place of connection instead of survival. Each insight supports the next one, and together they reveal a new way of moving through life with clarity, calm, and purpose. One of the things James Redfield does so well is remind us that these insights aren't meant to stay on the page. They're meant to change the way we move through our everyday lives. And the shift doesn't come from forcing anything. It comes from noticing small adjustments, quiet realizations, simple practices that bring more awareness into the moments we usually rush past. The first place to start is with attention. When we become more aware of what stands out to us, we naturally step into the flow Redfield talks about. Meaningful coincidences, sudden ideas, unexpected connections, repeated themes, or a phrase we hear twice in one day. These things are easy to ignore. But once we begin paying attention, we start to see how often life is trying to guide us. A simple pause is usually all it takes to feel the difference. Another practical step is staying aware of the energy we bring into our interactions. We don't need to label ourselves or analyze every detail. All we need to do is notice when we're feeling tense, defensive, drained, or overly concerned with the reaction we might get from someone else. Those moments are invitations. When we take a breath and reconnect with ourselves, The tone of the conversation often shifts on its own. Presence changes everything. Our childhood patterns are another important area to notice. We're not trying to fix the past. We're simply becoming aware of when an old habit is trying to run the moment. Maybe we feel the pull to withdraw. Maybe we sense the urge to take control or question everything. Maybe we feel the weight of responsibility for someone else's emotions. When we catch these patterns in real time, we give ourselves the chance to choose a different response. That choice is what creates growth. Intuition becomes a practical tool the moment we begin trusting it in small ways. We don't need to wait for big decisions. We can practice with simple things. Which direction should we take on a walk? Which task feels right to start with? Who comes to mind when we think of reaching out? Intuition strengthens through use, and it often proves itself long before we expect it to. Our relationships also shift naturally when we apply these insights. We begin listening with more attention. We communicate with more honesty. We stop trying to manage how someone else feels. We give space for real connection instead of trying to control the dynamic. When we show up this way, our relationships often become more open and more supportive without us having to push for anything. Another practical step is creating moments of quiet throughout the day. Not long meditations or complicated practices, just small pauses to breathe, reset, and reconnect. These pauses help us tune back into the energy Redfield describes. They keep us from slipping into old roles and help us stay connected to the steadiness within us. Finally, it's helpful to reflect on the synchronicities that show up. Writing them down or simply acknowledging them out loud makes them easier to notice in the future. Over time, we begin seeing how they connect, and that awareness strengthens our trust in the flow of our lives. When we approach our days this way, everything we've learned becomes something we can actually live. We start noticing guidance we used to overlook. We trust our instincts more easily. Our relationships feel clearer because we're showing up with more awareness. And without forcing anything, we move through life with a sense of connection that reminds us we're part of something much bigger than we realized. Thank you for spending this time with me on The Conscious Creator and exploring the ideas James Redfield shares in the Celestine Prophecy. What I've always loved about this book is that it doesn't lecture or overwhelm. It invites you into a story. The insights unfold through an adventure that's engaging, fun to follow, and surprisingly meaningful. Even if you read it just for the narrative, it's the kind of book that leaves you thinking about your own life in a new way. If you feel drawn to it, I encourage you to explore the full story for yourself. I've added a link in the description if you'd like to find a copy, and there's also a good chance it's available at your local library. However you choose to read it, it's worth the experience. There's something about the way Redfield weaves the insights into the journey that you can't fully capture by summarizing them. Your life is already guiding you. All you're doing now is learning how to listen.